The bitter winter wind whipped against my face as Carlos and I trudged through the deepening snow, our shovels scraping against the frozen ground. It was around 8 p.m., and our town was in the grip of a fierce blizzard. The streetlights cast an eerie yellow glow through the curtain of falling snow, creating strange shadows that danced across the white ground. We'd been going door to door offering to shovel driveways for cash since school had already announced it would be closed tomorrow. Most people either didn't answer or politely declined, their warm lights and cozy homes a stark contrast to the harsh cold we faced. After making about $30 between two houses, we approached a small corner property. Something about the house immediately set me on edge. Maybe it was how all the windows were dark, or how the snow seemed to pile unnaturally around its edges. Still, corner houses usually paid more, so we rang the bell. The door creaked open slightly, but whoever was on the other side remained hidden in the darkness. A deep male voice asked who was there, his tone carrying an unsettling nervousness that made my stomach tighten. I explained our shoveling service, requesting $40 since it was a corner lot. After an uncomfortable pause, the voice agreed almost eagerly. The door shut quickly, and I turned to Carlos, whispering that was weird. But we needed the money, so we started working. As I shoveled the walkway, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Glancing up at one of the dark windows, I saw a figure standing there just staring. Though I couldn't make out any features in the darkness, I felt those eyes boring into me. Every time I looked back, he was still there, perfectly still, watching. We finished the job as quickly as possible, but when we approached the front door for payment, the man's voice suddenly called out, "Go around back." Carlos and I exchanged worried looks, but foolishly obeyed. The backyard gate was nearly frozen shut, requiring both of us to push it open. Standing under the small back awning, we waited in tense silence. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a window being cranked open, followed by that same unnerving voice saying, "Come inside." The moment we entered through the back door, my entire body screamed that something was wrong. The house was completely dark, and an oppressive silence hung in the air. The man called from another room, claiming he was counting our money, but something in his voice had changed. It was almost predatory. As we approached the kitchen, my heart nearly stopped. Through the crack in the door, I could see him just standing there, staring at us through the narrow opening. Without a word, I grabbed Carlos's arm and made up an excuse about forgetting something outside. We bolted from that house as fast as our legs could carry us, leaving our payment behind. Back at my house, we thought we were safe until Carlos noticed fresh boot prints in the snow leading from our back gate to the shed. When police investigated, they found him, the same man from the corner house, hiding inside. He later admitted, while drunk, that he had planned to break in once we were asleep. Even now, years later, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if we hadn't left that kitchen when we did. Sometimes on snowy nights, I still see that dark figure watching through the window, and I remember how close we came to becoming another tragic headline in the morning paper. The harsh winter wind howled outside my window as I lay in bed, soft glow of my TV providing the only light in my room. Most of the snow from yesterday had melted, but patches of white still dotted the frozen ground like ghostly footprints in the darkness. The first impact against my window nearly made me jump out of my skin. The distinct splatter pattern of a snowball spread across the glass like skeletal fingers reaching into my warm sanctuary. When I opened the window to investigate, a child's laughter echoed through the night air, high-pitched and playful, yet somehow unsettling in the darkness. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that by not giving them attention, whoever it was would eventually give up. But they didn't. Night after night, the same routine would play out, a sudden impact against my window followed by that same haunting laughter. On the fourth night, I'd had enough. The moment I heard the snow at my window, I was ready. I caught a glimpse of a small figure darting away into the darkness. Without thinking, I threw on my coat and boots, determined to catch this mysterious prankster. The frozen grass rushed under my feet as I followed the trail of footprints. It led me across an empty field, each step bringing me deeper into the consuming darkness. The track stopped abruptly at a massive sycamore tree, its bare branches reaching toward the starless sky like gnarled fingers. My blood ran cold when I saw what surrounded the tree: the pristine white bands of flowers encircling its ancient trunk, and a wooden cross planted firmly in the frozen ground before it. It was a memorial, the kind you see marking the site of a tragic accident. The footprints simply ended there. No continuation, no signs of someone climbing the tree or walking away. They just stopped, as if their owner had vanished into thin air. The next day, my trembling hand scrolled through local news archives until I found what I was looking for: a tragic accident at that very spot. A mother and her young son had lost their lives when their car struck the tree. I couldn't bring myself to read the son's age. The thought that those playful snowballs and that innocent laughter might have come from. Even now, months later, I sometimes lie awake at night listening. Sometimes I swear I can still hear that laughter carried on the winter wind. And I wonder, was it just my imagination, or was there something more? Those footprints that led to nowhere haunt my dreams. I find myself avoiding looking out my window on snowy nights, afraid of what or who I might see standing there in the darkness. The blizzard came out of nowhere, transforming what had started as a peaceful hunting trip into a desperate struggle for survival. Heavy snow whipped around me in white sheets, obscuring my vision and disorienting me completely. My fingers had gone numb, and I knew I was too far from my own cabin to make it back safely. Through the howling wind and stinging snow, I spotted a log cabin nestled between a circle of towering pine trees. No lights shone from within, but at this point, any shelter was better than freezing to death in the storm. My knuckles were nearly frozen as I pounded on the door. No answer came, but I distinctly heard footsteps approaching from the other side. I waited for the door to open, but instead, a voice spoke through the crack: "Come in. Leave your boots by the door." The cabin's interior was barely illuminated by 2 flickering candles, casting long dancing shadows across the walls. The weak light didn't reach the far corner of the room, where I could make out only the silhouette of a man standing perfectly still. Something about his stillness made my skin crawl, but I tried to dismiss it as mountain folk being mountain folk. I thanked him for the shelter and settled onto the couch he'd indicated, my hunting gear and rifle within arm's reach. The silence in the cabin was deafening: no creaking floorboards, no wind whistling through cracks, just nothing. I waited to hear the man's footsteps retreat, but they never came. When I opened my eyes again, that dark silhouette remained in exactly the same position. Not a muscle had moved. "I think I'll just get some sleep now," I said, hoping he'd take the hint. No response. Just that unsettling stillness. I turned away, trying to calm my racing heart, but curiosity gnawed at me like a hungry wolf. When I looked back, my blood turned to ice. The figure had moved closer, though I hadn't heard a single footstep. The weak candlelight now caught the edge of his face, revealing skin so pale it seemed to glow with an unnatural whiteness. My instincts screamed danger. I grabbed my belongings and muttered some excuse about needing to leave, careful not to look at him again. I could feel his presence behind me as I fumbled with my boots outside, my fingers trembling from more than just the cold. Further down the hill, I found another cabin, this one warmly lit and welcoming. An elderly couple took me in, offering hot tea and a place to rest. When I described the cabin up the hill, their faces turned ashen. "Honey," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the owner of that cabin was murdered 2 years ago. It's been vacant ever since." The blizzard still raged outside, but I barely noticed it over the sound of my pounding heart. In my mind, I could still see that pale figure standing in the darkness, waiting. Waiting for what? I never want to know. The wind howled like a wounded animal as I stared out the window of my rented Airbnb cabin, watching sheets of white blur past. The blizzard had descended suddenly, transforming the peaceful Adirondack Mountains into a treacherous white wasteland. The wooden walls creaked under the assault of the storm, and I could feel cold air seeping through every crack. The knock at my door came without warning. Through the frost-covered window, I could make out a woman in a thick parka, her face red from the bitter cold. She introduced herself as Meredith, claiming she'd lost her way back to her own rental cabin in the storm. Something in her eyes seemed off, almost too bright to alert despite her apparent distress, but I couldn't leave her out there to freeze. I invited her in and offered coffee, which she refused, saying she just needed to rest. As she settled onto my couch, I retreated to my bedroom, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The storm's intensity increased, the wind's whistle taking on an almost human quality through the cabin's old windows. Another knock. This time a man stood at my door with an eerily similar story. He called himself Mark, and like Meredith, he claimed to be a lost tenant seeking shelter. The coincidence made my skin crawl, but what choice did I have? The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the snow showed no signs of letting up. As the day wore on, I noticed subtle changes in Meredith's behavior. She became more animated, more talkative, exchanging knowing glances with Mark that made my stomach turn. They praised my hospitality almost excessively, their words dripping with an undertone I couldn't quite place. When darkness fell, the cabin grew cold and silent except for the endless howling of the wind. I had to let them stay the night. The storm had only gotten worse. I retreated to my bedroom, making sure my belongings were secure onto my bed before trying to sleep. A loud thump jolted me awake. My bedroom door stood open, though I distinctly remembered closing it. The front door was wide open too, snow blowing in, and both Meredith and Mark were gone from their couches. Through the swirling snow, I could make out Meredith's figure in the distance, clutching my travel bag. As I rushed to put on my boots, I realized with horror that my bedroom door had closed behind me, and footsteps were moving on the other side. When I looked back outside, Mark had joined Meredith in the snow. They stood perfectly still, facing the cabin, their forms barely visible through the storm. I didn't wait to find out what they were planning. I ran to my Jeep and drove through the deep snow, my heart pounding in my chest. Later, I couldn't stop thinking about that third set of footsteps in my bedroom. There had to have been someone else in the house, someone waiting, watching, planning. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, remembering their strange, synchronized movements and those footsteps behind my bedroom door. I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed just a few minutes longer, trapped in that cabin with who knows how many others hiding in the shadows. The darkness in my room seemed to live that night, pulsing with the rhythmic flicker of my computer screen as I worked on my flash drive. I was alone in the library's computer lab except for him, the tall, pale boy with long black hair that fell over one eye. He always wore the same ripped jean jacket and Doc Martens, and I'd never once seen him speak to anyone else. When he sat next to me, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I quickly looked away, pretending to search through my bag while my heart hammered in my chest. His soft chuckle broke the silence, followed by a whisper, "Of course." The words seemed to hang in the air like frost. To break the suffocating tension, I mentioned our heavy workload. His response came in a voice that seemed to scrape against my ears. "You want the answers, don't you?" When I declined, he laughed again, a sound that made me want to cover my ears and run. Then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, he was gone. The only evidence he'd been there at all was a Swiss Army knife flash drive I left behind on the desk. I waited, but he never returned to claim it. After that day, he never came back to school again. 2 months passed before curiosity got the better of me. I found the drive buried in a box above my bed and plugged it in. The first folder contained exactly what he'd offered, every answer to every assignment. But deeper in the drive, things got stranger. The music folder held only 3 songs running on empty, White Rabbit and Helter Skelter. An edited folder contained what looked like innocent schoolwork until I found the best. 10 pages filled with nothing but his name, written over and over in an increasingly frenzied hand. My hands started trembling when I found the photos. Emergency escape plans from every classroom. Cigarettes smoldering on a bathroom floor. Coins scattered beneath a note reading CHUMPCHEENGE in desperate capital letters. And then, a picture of me reading in my English class, a class he wasn't even in. The final document was titled "Rest in Peace 2." It was empty, waiting to be filled. I still had the drive. Sometimes late at night, I find myself staring at it, wondering about its owner, the boy who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only these digital breadcrumbs of something dark and unfinished. What was the significance of those 3 songs? Why my photo? And most chillingly, who was meant to be number 2. In my darkest moments, I wonder if I was meant to find that drive. If everything, his strange behavior, his sudden disappearance, the carefully curated contents was all part of some plan I'm still unwittingly playing into. Sometimes when I'm alone in the computer lab, I swear I can still hear that laugh echoing through the empty room, and I wonder if somewhere, in another document I haven't found yet, he's already written my name over and over again. Next to my bed stands a storage closet that's haunted by nightmares for years. It doesn't have a normal door, just a large square panel that lifts out completely when you grab the edges. I never thought much about it until that night when I was 19, when everything changed. The first time it happened, I woke to find the door leaning against my bed frame. Nothing too alarming, it had fallen out before after all. No hinges meant it could easily slip free. I simply pushed it back into place and went about my day. But the next night, a sound jolted me awake around 4 a.m. In the darkness, I could make out the door's silhouette once again resting against my bed. The repeated incident unsettled me, making me wonder if the wall was starting to crumble around the edges. Too tired to deal with it, I left it until morning. The third night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned for hours in the darkness, my mind racing with unnamed anxieties. Then came the sound, a heavy thump that seemed to echo through my bones. The door had fallen again. Frustrated, I decided to just leave it open. That's when I heard it, the soft rustle of a plastic bag from inside the closet. The sound was so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. My blood turned to ice as I realized there was no draft, no reason for that sound except. My trembling hand found the light switch. As brightness flooded the room, my worst fears materialized before my eyes. There was someone inside my closet, staring at me from the darkness. The moment our eyes met, they tried to shrink back into the shadows as if I hadn't seen them. But I had. Oh God, I had. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. All I could do was scream for my father. Those 10 seconds before he reached my room felt like an eternity, with those eyes watching me from the darkness. When he arrived, I could only point at the closet, my voice frozen in my throat. My father searched every inch of that closet but found nothing. He tried to convince me I was seeing things, and for a moment I almost believed him. Almost. I couldn't face sleeping in that room again, so I grabbed a blanket and fled to my parents' room. Before sleep could claim me, I heard in my bedroom door opening down the hall, followed by the thunder of footsteps racing down the stairs. The front door slammed with such force it shook the house. Only then did my parents finally believe me. Later, we discovered the truth. He had been hiding inside an empty container in the closet, watching me sleep night after night. Sometimes I wonder how long he had been there before the door started falling. How many nights had he spent studying my routine, watching my every move? Even now, years later, I can't sleep with the closet door closed or open. Every rustle makes my heart stop, and sometimes in the darkest hours of the night, I swear I can still feel those eyes watching me from the shadows.